So, I bet you probably all noticed it, right? Wars aren't slowing down at all. In fact, they're starting to feel very permanent, like a constant hum in the background of global politics. What if it's not by accident, but by purposeful design, leading us into a future of endless conflict that's already reshaping the world as it is? We're standing on the brink of a new era where wars aren't just about territorial gains or even ideology. They're part of a larger system that only benefits a select few. You have nations, corporations, and yes, even governments who are all building economies around conflicts, pushing us deeper into a cycle that's already currently hard to break out of. And as geopolitics becomes more competitive, the stakes keep getting higher as it is. So, with all this in motion, how does this economic fuel the never ending war machine? Well, let's start by breaking down the economic engine that powers these endless wars: the military industrial complex, the governments, and how war itself becomes a resource just to be extracted, all while incentivizing their own people to join the army and fight. War, as we all know, is a business. It's one of the biggest and most profitable industries in the world. The military industrial complex thrives on continuous conflict, and every war is just another cash injection into defense contractors, arms manufacturers, and private military firms. You have companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and yes, even Boeing, making billions off of government contracts, as the United States alone spent $877 billion on defense in 2022, more than the next 10 countries combined. And with conflicts brewing worldwide, that number will only rise. But it's not just about corporations benefiting. Governments use war as a tool for economic expansion, either directly through resource extraction or by securing influence over other critical regions. The US occupation of Iraq wasn't just about Saddam Hussein. Oh no, it was about securing access to the Middle Eastern oil fields, ensuring long-term geopolitical control over them. Similarly, China is expanding its own influence through economic warfare by buying up strategic ports and resources in Africa, while Russia fights to hold on to energy dominance over Europe. Then there's the domestic angle here. War is an economic safety net. Militaries will offer a way out for young men with no future, no job prospects, and no stability. The US has seen an increase in recruitment bonuses, with some branches even offering up to $75,000 for just enlistments alone. War provides structure, discipline, and in some cases, a way to escape poverty. In a system where inequality is currently growing, the military becomes one of the few reliable paths for financial stability. It's a cycle that ensures there's always a willing fighting force, for whatever the cost. Now, in this day and age, most war economies today tends to last as long as the country's currency remains stable, or is even propped up by a more stable country, or even organizations. Take Ukraine for example. If the West had stopped sending monetary aid, the war wouldn't have lasted as long as it has. Both sides are making money from this conflict. Make no mistake there. From Russia's perspective, their economy is becoming more self-reliant because of the war. In a way, you could argue that Russia is now operating under a war economy. At the current rate, prolonging the war is more profitable for them. The same goes for the West, which isn't just profiting from the Ukrainian conflict, but from other wars as well. One of the biggest examples is the arms sales industry, one of, if not the biggest source of income for the United States and many other Western countries. And this is why we'll continue to see more wars, because the military-industrial complex just demands it. Profit comes before human life, which is very sad. On top of that, control over trade routes, resources is a major advantage for any country. It allows for dominance in the global trade and resource surplus for domestic use, particularly for the petrodollar itself. A good example is the Red Sea, where the Houthi forces in Yemen have disrupted key trade routes. Situations like this lead to countries engaging in what you might call a silent war, limited duration conflicts with targeted strikes and/or special operations. I will cover that separately in a different video though. Finally, there's a more sinister effect at play here. With the job markets looking very unstable now, and in the future possibly, desperation will push more people toward military service as a way to secure money and even shelter. Governments and private military companies all know this. It's an easy way to get fresh recruits for future wars. We're already seeing it with Western countries offering military enlistment as a path for social benefits, which in these economic times isn't exactly a bad deal or idea. But remember, war isn't all about money. It's just about shaping society as well, about giving people a reason reason to fight. And in an era where more men than ever feel lost, governments are going to be taking advantage of that, for sure. Now, with modern society having left out a lot of young men behind, traditional roles being faded out, career opportunities are currently shrinking, and social alienation is on the rise. In a 2023 Pew Research poll, which found out that over 60% of young men feel directionless and lack a sense of purpose, governments and military institutions all recognize this and have begun to even weaponize it. There's a reason why military recruitment ads in the US, China, and Russia emphasizes masculinity, brotherhood, and adventure. War gives purpose to those who feel lost, turning their frustrations and repressed anger into controlled government-directed force. It's a very old tactic used in Rome, in Napoleon's France, and yes, even in Germany in the 1940s. By redirecting young men's aggression outward towards foreign and or even domestic enemies, rather than letting it boil over internally. And it's not just about the soldiers here. A culture that thrives on war needs a population that supports it, of course. You have war films, video games, and media constantly pushing the themes of nationalism and heroism to the public. The idea of a just war is baked into Western storytelling, and when an enemy is needed, one will always be found, whether it's terrorism, communism, fascism, or some future AI-driven conflict. But the cost? An entire generation of men who will return from war broken, mentally and physically as well. PTSD rates among veterans will continue to rise, with over 30% of post-9/11 combat veterans diagnosed with severe PTSD. And yet, society moves on. The war machine finds new recruits, and unfortunately, the cycle repeats. I will say this: the state, or rather the government, has historically used war as a tool to conquer other nations. Why? Because kings, politicians, and dictators understood that dissatisfied men could accomplish a lot for them. Better to direct that energy outward than risk being overthrown by those same men. But unlike in the past, modern soldiers really don't have much to gain from these wars, aside from defending their own country, which makes logical sense. And by that I mean, what's the reward for those being sent into endless conflicts now? Not much. The state can push national pride or even outright nationalism, but that only goes so far. In ancient times, soldiers at least had tangible incentives, that being land, loot, and bounty, taken from those that they have conquered. Survival actually came with great payoffs. Now, veterans return home to broken families, poor job prospects, PTSD, or even physical injuries. And for what? Freedom and democracy? Where we didn't even need to be in those places to enforce it to begin with? This is something anyone considering joining the military should seriously take into account. There's also another factor here, that being internal problems within Western countries themselves. Do you honestly think men and women will fight for these states' ambitions when their own government won't even fix the issues at home? Of course not. They're not going to fight in these pointless wars. So what will the government do, you ask? Well, they'll use two things to solve that problem. First, they'll push to increase the birth rates to replace the battlefield losses and gain new recruits. Second, they'll use foreigners as cannon fodder to fill those gaps. But at the end of the day, the state doesn't really care, as long as the war continues, of course, for whatever reason they have. Just ask the Ukrainians who don't want to fight. And speaking of new ways, war itself is evolving. The next generation of warfare won't just be fought by man, but by machines. And that actually changes everything. As we all know, warfare is on the brink of transformation. The days of human-dominated battlefields are fading. Machines, AI, and cybernetics are taking over. We're already seeing the early stages in Ukraine, where drones are fighting drones, autonomous weapons strike targets without direct human input, and AI-driven surveillance tracks enemy movements in real time. The next step? Fully automated warfare. Imagine conflicts where robot mechs replace infantry, cybernetic soldiers return to the battle after losing limbs, and AI commanders direct entire campaigns with cold precision. The United States military is already testing exoskeleton suits for their own soldiers. China's investing in AI-controlled drone swarms, and Russia's developing autonomous tank platoons. The future battlefield will only be more efficient, but also more psychologically devastating. Why, you ask? Because war will become more detached, more relentless, and more inescapable. There will be no safe zones, no clear front lines, soldiers will be hunted by machines they never see, and even when they leave the battlefield. AI-driven psychological warfare will also continue, through propaganda, deepfake manipulation, and yes, even cyber attacks. Future wars won't just break the bodies, they'll shatter the mind. And let's not forget here, When warfare becomes way too easy, governments will have fewer reasons not to fight. If the robotic soldiers are the ones that are being lost, what's stopping nations from escalating conflicts to the levels we haven't seen since World War II? And this is what we're currently seeing with warfare that is actually evolving, because it's to meet the needs of the state in future conflicts, making war more digestible for both the public and the soldiers as well, allowing it to continue with less resistance. It's messed up, but from a politician's perspective, as technology advances, they'll care less about human capital. With robots fighting in place of soldiers, the human cost actually decreases, but the war machine keeps going on, unironically. Humans will still be on the battlefield, make no doubt of that. But as technology progresses, though, whether fast or slow, it will introduce new problems. Look at the war in Ukraine. You have FPV drones originally never meant to be mobile guided missiles, which are now being used to strike soldiers and moving vehicles via remote control. Who would have thought of that, right? But that's what war does. It advances technology and society at the cost of human life. This is where cybernetics and implants come in to keep the soldiers fighting non-stop. Disturbing, I know, because while you can patch up the physical injuries, the psychological damage is unfortunately permanent. We're soon going to be seeing actual battle mechs instead of tanks, exosuits, increasing infantry survivability, and while tanks won't actually disappear yet, their role will be very much so limited, something we're currently seeing with FPV drone warfare in Ukraine. Drone versus drone combat is actually unfolding in real time in Ukraine. Right now, only a few countries are seriously investing in advanced systems. You have America, Russia, and China. Even though China isn't in any active wars currently, they're still testing their military hardware through proxy conflicts. Then there's the AI weapon systems, which are enhancing targeting speed, intelligence gathering, and enemy movement predictions. This will force armies to adapt in ways we haven't seen before. A very nightmarish way to fight, if I'm being honest. And if war becomes this efficient, it means conflicts will escalate faster than ever before. That's where geopolitics comes in here, because we're already heading toward a world where superpower clashes will be head-on. For decades, the world operated under a unipolar system, one dominated by the United States. That era is almost coming to an end. We're now fully in a multipolar world where power is fragmented, competition is fierce, and wars becoming more frequent tool for statecraft. China is actually expanding its influence, not just economically, but militarily, building alliances with both Russia and Iran, which is challenging the US dominance in the Pacific region, and preparing for a potential invasion of Taiwan within the next decade. Meanwhile, Russia's reasserting itself through military force, using Ukraine as a testing ground for future conflicts. NATO is expanding, but they're having internal fractures, which is currently growing, with Europe struggling to balance economic stability and military commitments. And then there's the wild card here, nuclear conflict. Proxy wars are heating up across the globe, no doubt. But at what point do they spiral into direct superpower confrontations? The risk of nuclear war is higher than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis, with Russia openly threatening to use tactical nuclear strikes, China ramping up its own nuclear arsenal, and the United States modernizing its deterrence capabilities. The world is returning to a Cold War mentality, but without the restraints that defined the 20th century. Back then, both the United States and the USSR had clear lines they wouldn't cross. Today, those lines are currently fading, and with AI, cyber warfare, and autonomous weapon systems, the threshold for conflict is lower than ever. So what's concerning for me right now in the geopolitical realm is that we're on the verge of new wars, particularly in the Middle East, mainly in Iran and possibly in Taiwan, maybe later. Western leaders in the unipolar world are currently fueling conflicts rather than resolving it, simply because they refuse to lose control and influence, which makes sense. Now, historically, this mirrors how the Roman Empire operated. Diplomacy isn't an option for them, because maintaining dominance takes precedence. If you weren't aware, one Western leader outright said, and I'm not even kidding, close to the lines of peace through war. But that was the Danish Prime Minister, for those who don't know, pushing up a straight-up 1984-style narrative to justify prolonging the Ukrainian conflict. She believes Ukraine should achieve peace through strength, a very unrealistic stance given Ukraine's current situation. The reason leaders here say things like this is because the world order is shifting. We're moving toward a multipolar world, and they just can't accept that. That's why war will continue for all the reasons that I just laid out. You have pride, greed, wrath, and envy, and yes, even gluttony, making it nearly impossible to escape conflicts on the geopolitical stage currently. So, to conclude here, truth be told, this video was actually inspired by two things. One being what the Danish Prime Minister said, which I already mentioned. The other was a video game called The Forever Winter. Great game, by the way, in terms of it being so anti-war that it paints a bleak glimpse of the future where humanity fights just to survive after everything is destroyed. Competing superpowers wage war in a ways that mirrors the 1984 fictional universe, with factions battling for control after government leaders and society collapses, leaving AI to guide those that are fighting still just to see another day. Scary, right? Hopefully that never happens to us, but the way that the wars are unfolding, whether manufactured or just inevitable, it's not looking good for humanity. On the bright side though, prepare for life's hardships, stand by your friends, be there for your loved ones and family, and the most important of all, plan accordingly. Do what you can to prevent the conflict from spreading by having messages of peace and utilizing ways to get our politicians to use diplomacy. I know, you would think that they would, but they don't. Because realistically, that's all you can do. To those who have served, are serving, and or are considering it, if you feel like it's the right thing to do to protect your own country, then by all means do so. But if it's just for the money, don't. That's all I'll say. I've included sources in the description if you're interested. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video where I'll be covering how the female womb is being weaponized and how it relates to more wars in the geopolitical sphere, tying it back to this discussion. Otherwise, guys, have a great day.